So good to see everybody here tonight and hanging out. I mentioned earlier that I like surprises, and I really do. I love surprises. I love surprising other people. I love being surprised. Even when that's scaring, I love scaring other people. When somebody scares me, usually after the heart attack, like I know it's not going to happen, usually I'm like, good one. Like I love being like surprised by things. And this time of year, I think it's just so much a part of what we do. There's just surprise embedded in so much of this season for us. Years ago, Sherry and I, when we first had kids, we actually made a decision in our house that some of you maybe made, and we chose to not give gifts to each other during the Christmas celebration. People make that decision for all kinds of reasons. For us, it was really simple. It had to do with money. And the fact that we kind of recognize, like, if we buy gifts for each other, it means our kids aren't going to get anything. So we eventually realized this is going to get awkward when our kids are old enough to realize, like, you guys are giving each other things and you're not. Like, so we said, you know what, this isn't about us. And let's just forego this. Let's spend the money on our kids. That's an easy decision to make, right? Those of you that have made it. Right? Like it's about the kids. And like when you have kids, like Christmas, just like there's nothing better than seeing them excited. When they're little, seeing them excited. When they're older, like I have teenagers now and it's still fun to surprise them. I still look forward to tomorrow and just seeing the look on their faces. So that was an easy decision for us. So now for like the last 16 years or so, we've never given each other gifts. Like it's been a rule. Like, and we always check in with each other. Like, you didn't get me anything, right? Yeah, I didn't get anything. You better not have gotten me anything, Because the nightmare is that you got me something. I thought we agreed, right? We are pros at not getting each other anything now, right? 16 years of I don't get you something, you don't get me anything. And then this year, I decided I wanted to surprise her. So I was like, this is going to be great, right? This is going to be so awesome. And so I went online and I started shopping online because that's the way that I like to shop. It's a lot easier for guys to hunt and kill what they're hunting for online than it is with the malls and all the people. There's like collateral damage if I go shopping into the malls. But online, I could find what I wanted. So I went looking online. I just thought, I don't care about the rules in our house. I'm going to break the rules. I'm going to find the perfect gift. And so I did. I searched. I found it, I paid for it, I got shipping, which I've learned something about shipping, over the years. There's next day air, and then there's like 2-day shipping, and then there is this broad category that we just call shipping, right? Like shipping, this just means that whatever you bought is no longer with the person you bought it from, and it's not with you, it's just somewhere. That's what shipping means, right? And so I paid for shipping. I didn't pay for 2-day shipping. I didn't pay for next day air. I just paid for shipping. It's this no man's land where packages just disappear. So I paid for it. I was excited. I went, came to work the next day, told a couple people about it, and I was just like all jacked up. Man, I get to surprise my wife. This is really going to be fun. Then all of a sudden, it dawns on me. We order a lot of gifts online every year. And the boxes, when they arrive, whether FedEx, UPS, or the mail, they're usually at home long before I get home. Sherry usually beats me to them, which means that normally she'll take the boxes into our bedroom, open them up, and then hide the gifts around the house like parents do, right, from their kids. And so all of a sudden it dawns on me, I just ordered a gift that I wasn't supposed to order, and I paid for shipping, and it's going to arrive, and she may get it and be the one to receive it. This is going to be a problem because she'll open it right up and the whole thing's ruined. So all of a sudden the anticipation and excitement turned into neurotic anxiety, right? Like, this is not good. Like, this is going to ruin the whole thing. She's going to be mad, and there's all this different stuff, right? And so then for the next several days, I kept checking the mail, which I never do. Like, I never check the mail for one main reason. There's one thing that comes in the mail, right? Bills, exactly. So I never check the mail. That's for somebody else to do. I'm so bad about checking the mail that if I go to the mailbox and there are things in there that don't pertain to me, I will close it and leave that stuff in there for someone else to get. I hate the mail. So when I come home every day for several days, then I keep asking if the mailman's come, my wife's getting a little bit suspicious. Like, what's going on? And finally, after the weekend, on Monday night, I came home. Our mailman runs late in general. It's a great thing, really great at the holidays because I actually beat her to the mailbox on Monday. I walk out into the dark. I open the mailbox. I reach my hand inside, and when I do, I feel the package, and I'm like, yes, this is awesome. Like, it's all going to work out. It got here in time. And so I bring it out, and now I enter into a dilemma that every single one of us knows. When you come home with a gift, and the person you're giving it to is inside the house. Standing in the driveway, I'm like, how am I going to get this in here without her knowing? Like, this whole thing is about to fall apart. And so literally, I take the package, I shove it under my shirt at first. I'm like, this is not going to work. I put it behind. I'm like, okay. I look up through the windows of our house, and I can see that she's walking through our house and going back into our bedroom. So I make a break for it. I jump to the door. I get there. I fling the door open. Rather than go hide it right away, this is what Mr. Genius does. I was so excited I wanted to show our girls. And so they were downstairs behind a locked door, and they were doing something. I'm assuming wrapping some amazing present for their dad, right? That's a hint to them if they haven't heard this yet. But I go downstairs, I knock on the door, they're like, who is it, Dad? I'm like, go away. I'm like, no, I got Mom's gift. And so they crack the door, I pass it through, and they close the door really quick, and then I hear the oohs and the ahs as they open it. And I was like, yes, at least 16-year-old girls and 14-year-old girls and 12-year-old girls like it. Maybe my wife will like it. And so I'm all excited. I go upstairs, again, sneak past Sherry, into our bedroom, and I stash it. This is where the story gets even better. Later that night, we decide that we're going to wrap presents in our room. Lock door, hang out, listen to music, wrap some gifts. So we're there wrapping presents, and I all of a sudden get this brilliant idea. I'm going to wrap her gift right in front of her. This is not about her at this point. At this point, it is completely about me, right? Like, now I'm just having fun. Like, I'm just messing with her at this point. And so I get the package and I kind of stash it with the other stuff. And then at one point, I cut a piece of wrapping paper that I knew was about the right size. And then quickly, I grabbed the package. I put the paper over it almost completely. And then I began wrapping it. Now, I need to tell you something. I'm going to confess this in here. I've told a couple other services about this. I will kill you. I will hunt you down and kill you if this leaves this room. But when it comes to wrapping presents, I have a little Martha Stewart in me. I'm not kidding. I like cinnamon sticks and twine that's sparkly and gold paper. And for me, like, half of the fun is like giving them this amazing wrapped present. And I know that right now I just lost credibility with a bunch of guys in the room, but just hang with me here. So I'm sitting here and I'm taking my time and I have this beautiful gold wrapping paper and I've wrapped it with this sparkly twine and now I'm taking some ribbon, this gets really good, that's shiny, and I've twisted it and I'm wrapping it through. I mean, it looks literally like something that should be on Pinterest, but I don't even know what Pinterest is because I don't go on there, I promise. And I'm about to put the last finishing touch on and Sherry's sitting literally, she's like right here, she's this close to me, she's like right here, she looks and she goes, who's that for? And I looked at her and I go, who's what for? And she goes, who's that for? And I said, oh, this is for you. She's like, no, you didn't. And I'm like, yeah, you did. And like, it was like the best moment, like right then. So now she gets two surprises. She gets a gift and this great moment last night as she saw this thing, you know. The only thing that's greater than that is now that I've told this story, I think she feels the responsibility to reciprocate, right? So I'm guessing that since she's not in the room right now, she's off scrambling to buy me something or get even by just wrapping something I already own and giving it back to me. Because that's the kind of thing my wife would do. But I love surprises, and I think we all do. I think that's what we love about this whole season, this whole thing about Christmas is the surprise. And I think it's also one of the reasons why we love the story of Christmas so much. Because embedded in this story are surprises that are absolutely unbelievable, things that are so easy for us to gloss over. In fact, I think the tendency, because of the familiarity, because of the few details we do know, the tendency is for us to maybe miss the deep meaning, the surprises, the things that are embedded there that truly rock our understanding of who God is. And that's what I want us to think about for the next few minutes. The story of Jesus, the biographies of Jesus, begin in very different ways. Matthew and Luke begin with the birth of Jesus and the events around the early years. Mark begins a little later, but then John actually begins in a very surprising way. The Apostle John, when he wrote his biography of Jesus, also known as a gospel, when he wrote his biography of Jesus, he began at a completely different place that I think is shocking when you see what he said. So I want to start just by reading John chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. It says this. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." This is how John starts the story. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. When John begins this way, he begins on a very cosmic level. He begins on a level that for most people, they never saw this coming. We're starting the story of Jesus out there. This is a massive way to begin. He starts with this phrase, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. There is something philosophical and poetic and meaningful that John is swimming in as he uses this terminology. The word is actually in Greek the word logos. And logos was very familiar to the audience that would have been reading this biography of Jesus. The first listeners to this, when they heard the word logos, they knew what that actually meant. To the Jews, logos, the word, was not a new concept. The Jewish people had spent decades and centuries understanding, studying the logos of God. The logos was God in all of his reason, God in his law, God and the way that he organizes the universe, God in all of his control and wisdom. And so the Jewish audience was constantly studying and listening and trying to learn about the logos of God. So John says the logos was in the beginning, and the Logos was God. This idea wouldn't have been new to the Jews. The Greeks also, surprisingly, Logos, even though the Greek word just simply means the word, to the Greeks, Logos was more than just a spoken word. It was the unspoken word. Logos to the Greeks also spoke to the unseen divine force that was behind all that is. In fact, Plato himself said that the Logos was responsible for the creation of the world. 600 years before the birth of Jesus, the Greeks were using the word logos to describe why the world worked in the way that it did. This logos, whether you were Jewish or whether you were Greek, had reference to all things. Like the world that we lived in was the responsibility of this logos. This logos was the explanation for why you and I can be standing on this planet, moving thousands of miles per hour, spinning in circles, flying through space, and still be conscious. That's what the Logos to the Greeks and the Jews was. The Logos explained how you and I could be built with so much intricacy and detail and with the brilliance and all of the dependent systems and continue to function. The Logos is why things are the way they are. The Logos explains how the universe stays in this finely tuned balance. So when John says that in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, that was nothing new to these people. They both groups would have read this and said, exactly. We've been saying this for years. What they didn't see coming was the surprise in this. In the next few sentences, John changes everything and moves this in a direction that nobody expected. Look at verse 14 with me. He says, and the Word, the Logos that he's referencing, became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. This was provocative. This is surprising. The Logos becomes flesh. The Greek word for flesh that John uses to describe this Logos is the Greek word sarx. Sarx is a word that had all kind of connotation in it. The word sarx was a Greek word that spoke to the grittiness of flesh. It spoke to the ugliness of humanity. It spoke to the dirtiness, to the bodily functions. That's what sarx was. When people in the Greek culture used the word sarx, they were literally talking about just the gross stuff of being human. Like sarx, if you want to get into like junior high dirty humor, that's sarx. Sarx is the stuff that we don't want to show people, right? Sarx is the stuff that we leave in the bathroom. That's the place where sarx happens for most of us, right? Like when we leave our house, we leave our sarx behind. Like we put on the good look, like we put on our makeup and comb our hair and do all our things. I don't put on makeup, but maybe you do. But we do these things, right? We get dressed, we leave our house, and we leave the sarx behind. We leave the sarx behind closed doors because the sarx is the grittiness of being human. It's the dark. It's the broken. It's the gross stuff that is just like flesh. He says the Logos became sarx. This is even more interesting when you understand that the Greeks actually had two words to describe the body and the flesh. The other word was far more beautiful and had a better connotation. That word was soma. The word soma spoke to the beauty of who we are, spoke to the beauty of being human, like you are flesh, but it was an idea that was wonderful and great. John intentionally, as he's presenting this idea of the Logos coming to us, he presents it in a way that nobody expected. He doesn't come as soma, he comes as sarx. He comes in grittiness. This God of the universe comes to us in a way that nobody expected. In fact, he goes on and he says that this Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Literally, the phrase means that he tented among us. He put up a tent. He set up camp. Like he came to be present with us. Like God walks into our neighborhood and sets up a tent on somebody's front lawn and then drinks coffee and waves at us as we go to work in the morning. Like, hey, how's it going? Like God came and set up camp with us in the middle of all of our grittiness and brokenness and darkness. The Logos comes. He doesn't just hang out. It's not just that he's comfortable with. He is in it. Do you realize what this confronts in how we typically think of God? We typically think of God as barely tolerant of our sarxiness, right? He's barely tolerant of our grittiness. And yet here we have God not just tolerating, we have God moving toward the sarx. Like this is a God who dwells in the broken. This is a God who's comfortable in the realm of the dysfunctional family that only gets together around the holidays, right? Like this is a God who's okay with things not being okay. This is a God who comes to us. And in our culture, for us, we often have this notion of God being distant, of God being away from us. And yet when you see the biblical narrative, you realize that whether it was in the Old Testament or in the story of Christ coming in the New Testament, that is never an idea that the Bible presents. That's our own creation. We've come up with that. We're the ones that think that God's distant because every time we meet him, he's coming to us. He's coming near. And he's coming into the sarx. He's coming into the flesh, the broken, the messed up part of who we are. He is comfortable with our brokenness. He's comfortable and okay with this darkness. He's not surprised by it. What's also surprising is not just the fact that he becomes sarx, but also the way in which he comes. The way that John presents this and the way the other Gospels tell the story was a brand new way of understanding who God is, who this Logos is. For the Greeks, historically, they understood God in the phraseology of mythology. The way that mythology described God in the early days continued on into their culture. In mythology, God was not just distant, but when he came near, you were scared of him. Because when God came near, he came with a thunder. He came with lightning, right? God was a God that carried a hammer. And when God interacted with people, he overran them. The gods were crazy in Greek culture, right? Like Zeus, when he spoke, his voice boomed and the windows on houses rattled. That's the way the Greeks thought of God. God, when the gods showed up, they showed up at the front door and they banged and they crowded into your living room and they took over your life. They announced themselves loudly and boldly and oftentimes obnoxiously. To the Jews, God was often just angry or distant or disappointed with them. And in this story, we have a story that presents God, the true God, in a way that nobody had really thought of before. Listen to the way that this happens. Think about this in contrast to the way that we think and those people thought of God. In Luke chapter 2, it says this. This is how he comes to us. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. This God is different. This God doesn't enter the way the other gods entered. The other gods came through the front door. This God quietly and humbly comes in through the garage. This God comes in the bosom of a scared teenager. This God comes in the darkness of a night. This God comes in the form of a child that can't even speak. This God comes as a vulnerable God. This is a God who approaches us tenderly and differently than anybody had ever expected. Talk about a surprise. Like nobody saw this coming. Nobody ever would understand that the God of the universe would come to us in this sort of way. This God comes to us humbly. This is a God that comes at night, a God that stays in the shed instead of the inn. This is the God that becomes lowly in flesh. This is unlike anything we've ever seen. I think that's why when we struggle with wondering how we relate to God, this story resonates with us. Because this is a God that I can understand. The true God, the real God, comes to us in a way that it resonates with us. This is why when we find out that the true God, the real God, the God that the Bible presents to us is a God that loves us and a God that cares about us and a God that extends His grace and His mercy to us, it's the way that He enters that helps that make sense. That's why when we hear that He loves us, we go, well, of course He loves us. Look at the way that He came to us. He was okay with my brokenness, and even how He visited us is in this humble sort of way. This is a God who's okay with the sarks. This is a God who comes in humbly. But I think what's most surprising is that this is a God who continues to come. It doesn't end in a manger in Bethlehem. I think there's this tendency, this part of this, that we just get so numb to this that Jesus is like perpetually baby Jesus to us, right? Ricky Bobby still prays to Him, right? Like, there's this danger that we like Jesus just goes on and forever. Like, we just think of Jesus and we think, well, there's baby Jesus hanging out in the manger. He's just going to be there forever, right? Like that's it. No, that's not where this story ends. And what's most surprising about this is that this is a God who not only comes to us in the flesh and comes to us in humility, but this is a God who comes to us over and over and over again. He is the God that is with us. The name that Jesus is given is Emmanuel. Emmanuel literally means God present with us, God here with us, God in the now. His name is God is present with you. That's not just symbolism. That's just not a great idea that mom and dad gave him this really cool name. This is an on-purpose decision by this God of the universe to say, I am with you. Jesus is present tense, the idea of being with. He is here, He is now, He is with us, which is why we can look through centuries and you can hear the stories of thousands and sometimes millions of people, and they have this unbelievable mystical reality that they can describe to you in which Jesus has come to them and they experience Him being with them. This is real. We can actually know God. He's still here. He isn't there. He's present with us. Emmanuel, God with us. That's what this story is all about. He keeps coming to us. We remember. We have anticipation because this is the story that says we're not alone. This isn't it. There's more that's going on. In fact, even the way that He's described and the way that He has come to us speaks to that. John described Him as the light of the world, that He comes into the darkness and that the darkness can't overcome the light. It's something that for the past several weeks here at Summit we've been talking about. Jesus entering the darkness as the light of the world. Later in that same chapter in John 1, he says this. Describing Jesus, he says he's the true light, which gives light to everyone who's coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and yet the world did not know him. Like, not everybody gets it. But then verse 11 says, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. The light enters the world. The picture that's painted in the biblical narrative is in the middle of our darkness, in the middle of our shadowy moments, in the middle of our grittiness and our messes. We have a God who comes into that darkness as light. We have a God that when he comes to us and continues to come, he comes in the shadow of broken relationships, and he comes in the darkness of emotions that we can't put words to. He comes in the deep night of the soul in which there are questions that don't seem to have answers. That's when this God comes to us. The light of the world comes into the darkest moments of our life, and that's when we see him at his best. And that's what this is all about. You and I, we live in a dark place, a dark town like Bethlehem. A night might be hovering over our lives. And Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, cracks open the sky, breaks through the darkness, enters space and time, and he is with us, which is why we celebrate. We're going to take some time just to reflect. The band's going to sing a song, and I just want to give you an opportunity to pause tonight. All of us have places to go. All of us have family to be with. But in this moment, I just want to encourage you to pause and to consider the surprises. If this is a God who enters the sarks, if this is a God who dwells in the mess, if this is a God who comes humbly and shows us his love, and this is a God who keeps coming as the light into our darkness, what does this mean for us? Would you pray with me? Jesus, I pray that we'd see you for who you are. Maybe for the first time, maybe some of us recognizing, acknowledging things and saying, man, I've lived like a Greek. I've lived like one of the Jews. I've lived with an understanding of who you are that maybe has just kept me distant, kept me away from you. I pray that tonight would be one of those nights when we see you just clearly, and we see this season and why we gather and why we celebrate and why we hope. I pray that we would see it with all the clarity that you intend it to be seen with. We love you, and I pray that your truth would sink deep into our hearts. We pray this in your name. Amen.